Just when you thought a slasher franchise was dead, it always comes back for one final scare. This is previously on Scream.
What's your favorite scary movie?
Scream starts with a bang, an all-time barn burner of an opening featuring very famous movie star Drew Barrymore of the Hollywood Barrymores. Surely, this is the main character, thought the sweet, innocent audiences of 1996. No. In a move that mirrored the murder of Janet Leigh in Psycho, Scream dispatches with arguably its most famous cast member within the first 15 minutes. It also introduces several immediate tropes that were fundamental to the success of slashers. Absent parents, the old smash the window scare, and the slow-moving killer trope. Okay, well, maybe it subverts that one constantly. From here, we meet our main cast of characters, including actual series lead Sidney Prescott, played by former teen witch Neve Campbell. She's in a relationship with Billy Loomis, a character whose last name sounds awfully familiar.
Loomis. Dr. Sam Loomis.
I think our friend Sam Loomis didn't know that Marion was here.
Their relationship has been pretty chaste as of late, largely due to Sidney's overwhelming grief following the murder of her mother 1 year prior. Sidney's father, he's going to be at the Hilton by the airport.
The Hilton.
Out at the airport.
They're friends with certified movie buff Randy, the sarcastic Tatum,
Oh, you want to play Psycho Killer?
and Stu, a teenage wild man who seems incapable of keeping his tongue in his mouth. Also stalking the town, it's legendary tabloid journalist Gale Weathers, whose reporting on the trial of Sidney's mom's killer garnered her nothing but goodwill from our favorite final girl. Also on the case, Deputy Dewey, a cop who enters each scene with the charisma of a man who just got bonked on the head with a hammer. Like many of the earliest slashers, Scream fits the mold of a classic whodunit, or as Randy so elegantly puts it,
Everybody's a suspect!
with 2 kills under his belt and the town of Woodsboro spooked, Ghostface turns his attentions to our hero, Sidney, who has an interesting answer to the Scream series' most famous question.
Oh, come on, you know I don't watch that shit.
Why not? Too scared?
No, it's just what's the point? They're all the same. Some stupid killer stalking some big-breasted girl who can't act, who's always running up the stairs when she should be going out the front door. It's insulting.
However, when the shit goes down, she's not really the best at following her own advice. Which brings us to suspect number 1, boyfriend Billy, who comes under fire for having a very suspicious item for a high schooler in 1996.
What are you doing with the cellular telephones, huh?
Meanwhile, Sidney's father is not where he said he'd be,
You sure it was the Hilton?
Or the airport?
and Ghostface makes an important phone call.
Looks like you fingered the wrong guy.
Billy, now exonerated, decides to go for the Boyfriend of the Year award.
My mom was killed. I can't believe you're bringing this up.
I think it's time you got over that.
After being attacked verbally and physically in the bathroom, Sidney has seen enough for one day. Which brings us to the climactic house party. The teens proceed under the ever-watchful eye of Law Dog Dewey. Gale investigates the house, as well as Dewey, and Randy uses his expertise to lay out the series' most basic conceit.
There are certain rules that one must abide by in order to successfully survive a horror movie. For instance, number 1, you can never have sex.
Oh, that's nice and all, but Sidney almost immediately breaks rule number 1 in the series' most notable subversion of typical slasher norms. While this is going on, Ghostface has been sneaking and tripping all through the house, and in the process shows Tatum the door and wraps picture on Gale's cameraman, Kenny Powers.
And can I wear the Scream mask? The mask from Scream. When I do you from behind.
Next up is Billy, who Ghostface slashes and... Who am I kidding? We all know where this is going, right? After living through the classic can't start the car trope, Sidney discovers Dewey's been skewered and Billy is in fact the man behind the mask. But he's not alone.
Surprise, Sidney.
In another subversion of the lone killer trope in slasher movies, Ghostface turns out to be Billy and Stu. And in yet another reveal, they confess to the murder of Sidney's mother 1 year before and try to pin their crimes on Sidney's father, who's a long way from the Hilton by the airport. Billy's motive? Revenge. He blames Sidney's mother for breaking apart his family by having an affair with his father, which earns him a nice admonishing.
Fuck you!
However, as prior events now start adding up, it becomes clear that Billy and Stu aren't exactly the sharpest knives in the drawer. Their attempt to carve themselves into innocent victims and evade police suspicion allows Sidney to do the old disappearing trick. Stu reveals his motive
Peer pressure.
before getting his own chance to be part of a scary movie. Sidney debilitates Billy with an all-timer slasher weapon, an umbrella, and Gale guns him down. He gets in one final scare, allowing Sidney to perform one of her signature moves, the head pop. And that's a wrap on Scream, as the sun rises on what is now a mass murder scene. that will later become a lucrative Airbnb. However, this is just the beginning. In the words of Stu,
these days, you gotta have a sequel.
Scream 2. Scream 2 picks up with another barn burner of an opener, this time with two characters commenting on the racist trope of slashers always dispatching with black characters first. And, well, they're not wrong. They're killed in a sea of ghost faces at the premiere of Stab, the movie within the movie that's also the first movie, and it only gets trickier from here. We pick up with Sydney and Randy now attending arts college. Sydney has a new boyfriend, a massive cornball named Derek, who may or may not want to see a dead body. She also has a new best friend and roommate in Halleck. Randy has found a home in the film department, where he and his fellow buffs, including a Buffy and a Bullock, debate the merits of sequels and the topic du jour in 1997, violence in media. Hey, speaking of violence in media, Gale Weathers is back. She smells fresh blood in the wake of the Stab killings and resurfaces, bringing along Cotton Weary, the man Sydney falsely accused of murdering her mother. This ambush pretty much resets things between Gale and Sydney.
I'll share with you.
Okay.
Local newswoman Debbie Salt shows up to pester Gale for scoops and leaves some salty clues of her own along the way.
I gotta go. I've got a deadline.
Also, like an ever-watchful hawk, Dewey leaves his jurisdiction to look after the Woodsboro survivors, and probably to do his fair share of falling down and getting bonked on the head. The new Ghostface wastes no time trying to up the Barrymore factor of the first film, and having already dispatched Jada Pinkett Smith and Heather Graham, tricks Sarah Michelle Gellar into, yes, running up some stairs to her untimely death. Don't worry though, whoever this is, they're just as clumsy as the last guys. Dewey deduces a copycat killer must be on the loose, trying to make their own deuce, a prospect he seems to find thoroughly confusing. Randy delivers his expertise and reorients everyone on what to expect with the rules of slasher sequels.
Number 1, the body count is always bigger. Number 2, the death scenes are always much more elaborate. And number 3, if you want your sequel to become a franchise, never...
Ghostface pursues our heroes, first on the stage of an extremely high-budget version of Cassandra of Troy, then just out there in the open, just right there on the quad, man. While Dewey wrestles fecklessly with every Tom, Dick, and Harry cell phone user, Randy goes on to prove one of the few tropes he probably would not have liked to be right about. Nobody is safe in the sequel. Her sense of safety now shattered, Ghostface pursues newly reunited couple Dewey and Gale and manages again to skewer the Deuster. The action eventually comes together at the school theater, where Derek has been tied up for some kind of creepy fraternity hazing ritual. Ghostface removes the mask and, surprise Sydney, it was Mickey, the freaky Tarantino film student. Then it's curtains for Derek. Mickey's motive? He wants to be put on trial for the topic du jour of 1997, the effects of violence in media. With Gale in tow, Debbie Salt, who could have seen this coming, reveals herself as the second Ghostface. In a reversed Mrs. Voorhees, it turns out she's really Billy's long-lost mother, motivated to avenge her son's untimely death in the first film. A tussle ensues, but in the end, Mrs. Loomis gets the upper hand, which is when Cotton, the unlikeliest hero of all, shows up and does the right thing when he's promised the thing he wants most in the world, a Diane Sawyer interview.
Consider it done.
Mrs. Loomis goes down, but Sydney just can't pass up an opportunity and gets another head pop in. Just for fun this time. The story is over, and we've lost a lot of beloved characters along the way, but the movie delivers us one last trope. Nobody is dead unless you see them die, and Dewey, like an unstoppable Terminator fueled by ice cream and bloodlust, has survived. Scream 3. Scream 3 moves the action to where it all started in the first place.
Hollywood, California. Every street has a story, and these are but just a few.
Proving once again that no one is safe in the sequels, fake killer turned hero turned media icon Cotton is sacrificed in the opener. Sydney is hiding in a compound in the hills. Gale Weathers gets another soft villain reset, and Dewey works as a consultant on the set of Stab 3, back to Woodsboro. Me, oh my, are we layers deep into this now? Talk about deja voodoo. We have characters talking to their doppelgangers, on-set recreations of locations from the first film, real people, fake people. Detective McDreamy is on the trail of Ghostface with his partner, who cites some very sound logic.
He was making a movie called Stab. He was stabbed.
The killer could be anyone on the lot, which bafflingly includes Jay and Silent Bob, Princess Leia, fake Steven Seagal, cult film legend Roger Corman, as well as the entire cast and crew of Stab 3. As the new Ghostface works his way through the cast towards the new Sydney, the real Sydney visits the set of her house, Creed poster and everything. and even gets a chance to run up those stairs, just for old time's sake. Hey, speaking of old times, Randy returns, in a posthumous tape that he conveniently made during the last movie to warn his living friends about the rules of trilogies, just in case he dies.
True trilogies are all about going back to the beginning and discovering something that wasn't true from the get-go.
We're treated to one last dose of film expertise before Randy gets permanently ejected. An irate Lance Henriksen shuts production down, and a party takes place at his house, except he's nowhere in sight, leaving the cast, Gale and Dewey alone there, and Sydney in police protection, until Ghostface calls her to make a pretty smart observation.
Oh, it's hard being friends with you, Sydney. When you're friends with Sydney, you die.
Ghostface creeps and trips around the house. Multiple tussles ensue. Dewey gets bonked in the head, and through the power of cinema, the killer is revealed to be none other than Roman, Sydney's long-lost half-brother. His motive? Resentment. He was born out of a 2-year fling Sydney's mom had in Hollywood, and then subsequently shut out of her life. He was behind it all. He coached Billy and Stu. He framed Cotton. Why?
I'm a director, Sid. I direct.
Sydney's a little tired of these long-winded explanations she seems to get every few years.
God, why don't you stop your whining and get on with it? I've heard this shit before!
Stop!
And another fight ensues. And just when Roman thinks he has the upper hand, Sydney pulls the old disappearing trick and then stabs him with an ice pick, just like in Basic Instinct. He comes back for one final scare. This time, it's Dewey's turn for a head pop. The gang all return to Sydney's mountain chateau, and peace and happiness follows them for the rest of their days. And by the rest of their days, I mean 11 years. Scream 4. Kicking off with a bang, once again, Scream 4 gives us a perverse nesting egg of openings from the 7 stab movies that have come out thus far, before finally landing in the real-life, present-day Woodsboro. It's been 15 years since the original massacre from the first film, but there's still just one question on everybody's mind.
What's your favorite scary movie?
Dewey is the top law dog sheriff now. No more head bonking for this rootin' tutor. He also has a new partner in Deputy Hicks, much to the dismay of Gale, who struggles with small-town life and probably secretly wishes someone would start offing teens again so she could have some new material. Sydney has rebranded herself as a self-help writer who happens to be ending a book tour in the town where it all began. But it wouldn't be a sequel to a long dormant property without a new cast of teenagers to pass the torch to. In this case, it's Sydney's cousin Jill and her high school pals, another generation of kids whose movie obsession is only matched by their willingness to perform their lives constantly on social media. Oh hey, remember Google Glass?
Turn the fucking thing off.
The police immediately find evidence planted in Sydney's trunk, thus forcing her to stay put in Woodsboro. Ancillary characters start dropping like flies at the red right hand of the clumsy as ever Ghostface. Intrepid reporter Gale Weathers leaps into action. She seeks out the help of the twin powers of Neo Randy, or Charlie and Robbie, two guys who drop the rules of remakes during movie club.
Modern audiences get savvy to the rules of the originals, so the reversals become the new standard.
By examining the events of the first film, they deduce that Ghostface's next strike will be at a giant rager. In this case, it's Stabathon, the annual, overnight, insanely high-budget marathon taking place that very evening.
How meta can you get?
How what can you get?
I don't know, I heard them say it.
Gale investigates, only to be preyed upon and stabbed upon herself. Dewey shows up and starts firing his peacemaker, effectively chasing off Ghostface, but ending Sabathon prematurely. The new generation gathers at the home of horror buff Kirby to continue the botched marathon, but Ghostface heads there too, and quickly eliminates Robbie. Sydney arrives, and Ghostface proceeds to chase her and Jill, you guessed it, up the stairs. You know, like a family. Then Ghostface goes full remake with a recreation of the opening of Scream, and we get the ultimate answer to a movie trivia question about remakes.
Halloween, Texas Chainsaw, Dawn of the Dead, The Hills Have Eyes, Amityville Horror, Last House on the Left, Friday the 13th, A Nightmare on Elm Street, My Bloody Valentine, When a Stranger Calls, Prom Night, Black Christmas, House of Wax, The Fog, Piranha. It's one of those, right? Right?
This saves Charlie from Ghostface, except turns out he is Ghostface. Or at least one Ghostface. And the reveal of the other Ghostface leaves Sydney a little surprised. Jill's motive? Fame, resentment, envy, you name it. She's ready to off her cheating boyfriend, hello crotch pop, and become just as famous as her cousin, only this time by going viral by posting the whole thing online. Charlie's motivation is Jill, but his Randy-style crush on this generation's Sydney is nothing more than a heartbreak. Jill rants and raves before stabbing Sydney, and then proceeds to knife, scratch, and beat herself until Dewey arrives in classic Dewey fashion, a day late and $1 short. Jill's plan works. Paramedics escort Jill off the scene of the crime to the hospital in a flurry of media attention. But when she awakens, she learns that she is not, in fact, the new final girl.
They think Sydney just might make it.
What?
Like Michael Myers before her, Jill goes stalking the hospital in hopes of finding her relative. A tussle ensues in Sydney's room. Dewey arrives for the most head bonks yet. Gail arrives at gunpoint, only to be saved by Hicks. Jill gains the upper ground, but Gail distracts her long enough for Sydney to get in the ultimate hip hop. A straight up jolt of high voltage to the brain. Then everyone just decides to kind of, lay on the ground for a little while. It's been a pretty exhausting 15 years, hasn't it? After Scream 4, there was a noticeable shift towards what people came to call elevated horror. Art house adjacent movies that use trauma, repression, and grief as a central metaphor for their monsters reigned supreme. In the midst of this waning of all things slasher, Scream series longtime director Wes Craven passed away. It looked like perhaps there wouldn't be another entry in the Scream series. That is, until the flat circle of time looped back on itself, and a new Halloween movie, also called Halloween, starring series originator Jamie Lee Curtis, became a surprise box office success. So we all know what that means. Scream 2022, also called Scream, starts out with a bit of a surprise. The series' first non-lethal cold open. That's right, Tara, played here by Jenna Ortega, a teen who has a great love for elevated horror.
What's your favorite scary movie?
The Babadook. It's an amazing meditation on motherhood and grief.
Is attacked after the mysterious landline in her house rings for the first time in her life. Miraculously, she survives the new Ghostface's brutal onslaught and lands in the hospital right after this title card. Meanwhile, out in Modesto, Sam, Tara's estranged sister, has been living the blissful life of a bowling alley employee, along with her boyfriend Richie, who's also trying to go for the Boyfriend of the Year award.
You are my boner, pals.
A call comes in informing Sam of Tara's attack, and they're off to Woodsboro to meet the rest of the cast. Yes, that's right, another group of teenage horror obsessives who traffic in references to the original film.
I'll be right back.
There's Mindy and her twin brother Mason, both the respective niece and nephew of the long-dead horror hound Randy. There's also Wes, the son of Sheriff Hicks, and the kind of guy who has a crush on everyone and everything. Added to that, there's Sonia and the mysterious Amber. After an awkward reunion at the hospital, an emotional Sam spills the beans to Tara about a dark family secret. Sam is in fact the 90s love child of a teenage Billy Loomis prior to his killing spree in the first film. Also, sometimes she hallucinates that he's right behind her. Tara says she needs some time to process this information.
Get the fuck out!
In the hallway, Sam drops another meta moment on Richie.
You know that part in horror movies where you want to yell at the characters to be smart and get the fuck out? This is that part, Richie.
And they form a plan to bring in an old cowboy to help them out. This is where the Scream series gives us perhaps its most tragic and absurd figure, Broken Dewey, a husk of a man who has had more than his fair share of head bonks and broken hearts in the past 2 decades, and is just too old for this shit. Dewey reluctantly lays out the rules of surviving a stab movie and then kicks the youngsters out. Then his conscience gets the better of him, and he calls in the #1 top dog stab expert. Who else but our favorite final girl, Sydney Prescott, who definitely has a gun.
I'm Sydney fucking Prescott, of course I have a gun.
He then reluctantly texts his long-lost beloved before deciding that this cowboy is ready for one last rodeo. Time to load up the old peacemaker and sneak into the YMCA to take a shower. Meanwhile, at the Randy Meeks Memorial Theater, Sam confesses her family lineage, and Mindy uses her family's expertise to name the exact type of horror movie we're dealing with here.
Oh my god, he's making a requel.
She then proceeds to break down all the worst toxic fandom movie discourse of the past 10 years, with Sam putting it most eloquently.
Are you telling me that I'm caught in the middle of fan fucking fiction?
Meanwhile, Ghostface calls in a threat on Wes. A terrified Sheriff Hicks rushes home to save her baby boy, only to be greeted in broad daylight by a knife in the gut. And it's lights out for Wes as well, after Ghostface decides to give him a little shave. The entire police force has been distracted by the death of their beloved leader. This leaves Tara completely unprotected and vulnerable at the Woodsboro Hospital, arguably one of the deadliest and most irresponsible houses of medicine in the country. Richie arrives, followed shortly by Ghostface, who goes into filibuster mode, wasting time bragging and grandstanding, allowing our heroes the time they need to arrive for a rescue. Broken Dewey puts up a noble fight, and just when it seems he may have dispatched with the killer, he remembers the #1 rule of killing Ghostface. Always do a head pop.
You have to shoot him in the head, or they always come back.
Dewey!
Unfortunately for this old cowpoke, this wouldn't be a requel without truly saying sayonara to a grizzled old fan favorite. Dewey goes out in a bloody blaze of glory. For real this time. No fake outs, no miracle resurrections, or escaping the hangman's noose. Our favorite rootin' tooter is knocking on heaven's door, riding off into the Scream franchise sunset to the great roundup of residual checks in the sky. Sidney hears of Dewey's death and goes to meet with a grieving Gale, and the dream team is reassembled as Sam and Tara bury the hatchet on all of their icky family issues, being related to a serial killer and all that, and then they make a pact to do the unthinkable.
We're gonna get the fuck out of Woodsboro.
Sidney and Sam meet, and Sidney confesses she's known all along about Sam's paternal lineage. Sam tries to leave, but Gale and Sidney use some horror movie logic to try and persuade her to stick around and commit some murder. Sam refuses and splits, but not before Sidney plants a tracker on her car. A real Gale Weathers type move.
Take that as a compliment.
Which brings us, once again, to the climactic house party. Once again, the party ends prematurely for some reason, and our heroes are left to creep around the house and try and figure out who the hell's killing them. Sidney checks the tracker and makes a horrifying discovery, and a slow-motion crane move reveals the exact location of the party. That's right, it's a lucrative Airbnb. That also happens to be the site of the climactic house party from the original Scream where Billy and Stu murdered everyone. And I mean, how did they not know that? The parallels are really starting to show up. Ghostface attacks Mindy, sending everyone running into the living room to see what all the fuss is about. Wild accusations start flying around this group of friends who, let's face it, didn't really seem to like each other very much in the first place. And finally, the killer is revealed to be none other than Amber, who announces her guilt with a head pop. The group scatters throughout the house as Gale and Sidney arrive, locked and loaded, and Amber just kind of gives up and starts shooting. Gale goes down, but gives Sidney the motivation she needs to finish the job.
For Dewey.
Sidney enters the house and feels a sweet, nostalgic pang for high school in the mid-90s. She checks all the old hiding places and receives a phone call from Ghostface, who she chastises for a lack of originality.
I've seen this movie before.
Sidney discovers Richie, only to be attacked by Ghostface. In the midst of the tussle, Sam grabs the gun, only to be stabbed by Richie, the second killer.
Really wanted to be the one to kill you.
Amber and Richie's motivation? Their toxic fandom of the original film.
How can fandom be toxic? It's about love.
And their desire to create a whole new Stab franchise centered around a back-to-basics approach.
Can't have a bona fide Halloween without Jamie Lee!
Everyone gathers in the kitchen once again, and after a series of tense, sarcasm-laden confrontations, Sidney is stabbed and informed of her imminent demise at the hands of people who really need to go touch grass. That is until Tara, who was previously tied up in a closet, is revealed to have gone missing. Tara leaps into action, crutches is swinging, and blam! The house is in chaos. Sid and Gale go to town on Amber, who eventually gets the chance to remake her death from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Sam gains the upper hand on Richie, only to send them both into a Ghostface-style pratfall down the stairs. She sees her father's ghost, or his hallucination, whatever he is, in the mirror, and a latent instinct beautifully passed down through the miracle of inherited genetic information is suddenly recognized in Sam's heart. As Richie screams the rules of Stab, Sam reveals the series' newest bylaw.
Never fuck with the daughter of a serial killer.
Sam gains the upper hand and delivers out stabs galore to live out the, Ow. Okay, whoa. Okay. Yeah, he's... Alright, no, well, okay, now he's definitely dead. Whew. Holy guacamole. But of course, as Pauly Shore might say, it isn't over until the weasel goes pop. And this time, Sam throws in a few body shots for good measure. Amber shows up for one final scare, and it's Tara's turn to blast brains and sum up how she feels about the state of horror movies.
I still prefer the Babadook.
Two killers, once again dead. The seasoned first responders of Woodsboro chuckle as they clean up another bloodbath. And Tara makes a reasonable request.
Can you take us to a different hospital this time?
The new generation and the old generation bond over another night of bloodshed, and the torch of franchise continuity is passed down. Billy sends his approval from hell, and a new chapter comes to a close. And there you have it, every movie in the Scream franchise summed up in its entirety to this point. And although it would normally be safe to assume that the next chapter will follow the rules of its predecessors, there's an entirely new rule that, by nature of its setting, it will now have to comply by.
Start spreading the news.
Only in New York, right?
Unbelievable. Only in New York.
Only in New York.
Only in New York.
What the hell? It's only a little New York debut, you know?
That's right, Ghostface hits the Big Apple. And while he's by no means the first psycho killer to visit NYC, his presence here means that all bets are off as far as any rules are concerned.
Come on, come through New York, New York.
So sit back, relax, and try not to get stabbed by your neighbor. It's time for one final New York-style scare.